I'm Jonathan Horn.
I'm Cody Atkinson.
And I'm Matteo Schlapek-Savillo, and this is the 110 Percenters podcast. On this week's episode, we talk about Josh Fraser's remarkable start to life as a senior coach, discuss the AFL's proposed change to the competition structure, and shoot from the hip. Hello, and welcome to 110 Percenters, the footy podcast. My name is Matteo Schlapek-Savillo, and I write the 1 Percenters newsletter. I'm joined by Cody Atkinson of the ABC. Cody, how are you?
Having a great week, mate. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm equally having a really, really great week, actually. Jonathan and I were just discussing off mic that they've decided to turn the heating up in the studio again this week. I mean, it has been cold in Melbourne, Jonathan, but I think maybe not to the extent that would be suggested by the heating.
This is Bikram yoga territory we're heading into here, but
it is a little bit, isn't it?
It's a labour of love.
How are you otherwise, Jonathan?
Very well. Well, actually, I've got a cold, so apologies to all the listeners for the husky voice this week. It's something picked up somewhere along the line, but maybe the sauna type atmosphere might be good for that.
So we'll have a couple of basses or baritones
I think so.
On this week's show. I think maybe for the more ASMR inclined listeners, that'll be good news. Let us know what you think,
Can we
please.
tag it ASMR just so we get some...
Yeah,
some
maybe that'll
listeners?
pump up the numbers. Yeah, exactly. I'll add that tag into this week's upload and we'll see how it goes. Well, even though it didn't quite produce any genuine thrillers, round 15 was statistically one of the closest rounds in footy history. The Dockers made it 13 wins in a row after recovering from an inaccurate start to shake off a dogged Geelong side. An impressive Hawthorn beat a Gold Coast side that's now lost 4 in a row. On Saturday, Adelaide ground out a win against a spirited Melbourne, and Collingwood beat Port at a cold, wet, half-empty MCG. It really did feel a bit off-Broadway, that game. And on Sunday, North Melbourne defeated Richmond in a game both sets of supporters will want to quickly forget, and the Western Bulldogs capped off the round by beating a wasteful St Kilda side, which lost Jack Sinclair and Tom de Koning to injury. But we begin at Engie Stadium, maybe? I don't know, depends. The scene of where it all began to go wrong for Michael Voss in 2024, where on Saturday evening, Carlton, under interim coach Josh Fraser, recorded its 5th straight win. The Blues are suddenly 6-8, and with games against West Coast and Richmond coming up, they're a very good chance to be 8-8. The top 10 suddenly feels within reach. We're going to talk about a remarkable turnaround that has become one of footy's biggest storylines. Jonathan, you were at the game on Saturday at Engie Stadium. What were your takeaways from seeing the Fraser experience in person?
I was actually up there for a birthday. What better way to enjoy yourself with a few hours to spare than to head 30 kilometres out of town to Engie Stadium?
Was the commute, did that take longer than the game?
It's easy to get in, hard to get out. So, and there was also a Comic-Con convention next door, so it was a very sort of strange scenario.
Also, like people dressed as zombies and
So you had a few hours to fill then?
You've got this very strange phenomenon out on the concourse of like all these, because there were thousands of Carlton supporters at that game, sort of all wandering along next to sort of people 7 feet tall dressed as cats and whatnot. And so a unique atmosphere and not a bad game.
So you saw Kane Cornsew's cosplay stuff there is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
hearing that.
No comment when it comes to Kane, Cody. You know that. You know the rules.
Look, Jonathan, Cody and I think are going to very gleefully dig into the real kind of nerdy tactical stuff. But you were there. You saw the game. Tell us, did Carlton appear to be doing much differently?
I think that it is, and you guys will sort of get into the weeds of what they actually are doing differently, because they certainly are. This is a different team that we're seeing, and a more confident team, a more assured team. But they're definitely a team that has doubled down on what they're good at, I think. They haven't neglected what Voss was talking about every week, every press conference. He'd say the same things. Well, it's not as if Josh Fraser has sort of deserted the contesting clearance.
No, well, they're not suddenly Sydney.
No, exactly. And I think that against a team like GWS, they were sort of conspicuously beaten in that department, and it's one of those areas where they're just pining for Tom Green. They really missed him against a team like Carlton.
Yep.
On Saturday. Yeah, for sure.
Cody, please teach us. Give us the lowdown. What do you think? I guess based on this combination of the eye test qualitatively and then statistically, what do you think is different with Josh Fraser's Carlton side?
Can I start with my one thing at the top that I've got to be careful being wrapped over the knuckles. It's the Sydney Showground is what I've been taught time and time. It's not the showgrounds, it's the showground.
Oh, apologies.
Okay, right. Well, yeah.
There's only one ground there, and it has a show, and on the weekend it was Carlton's show. I think what you was fun.
Sorry to interrupt, Cody. That actually reminds me, we did get a message from a listener after last week's show. Speaking of being wrapped over the knuckles, correcting us. That's a euphemism, correcting me basically for calling it the AFL Hall of Fame rather than the Australian Football Hall of Fame. So I do apologise, and maybe, well, hopefully not, but there might be a sort of errata and corrections section in future shows.
And you're from South Australia. Shame on you, Matteo.
I should know better, shouldn't I? Yeah, exactly. Yep. Sorry, Cody, I interrupted.
No, look, and I encourage all listeners to pick out all flaws in everything that we have to say, big or small. I make a lot of them. So I think Carlton put on a show on the weekend again, and they kind of got themselves in that position that they could have collapsed again, and they didn't. There's something that's happened there that's shifted it, and I've been trying to dig it through the numbers and trying to line up with the footage of what I've seen. And it doesn't seem like much, but I think the fundamentals to their game have stayed solid, but they've just dialed down the risk a bit. I'll go into it a little bit. They've gone from being pretty league average with time in possession and time in forward half to being sort of near the top end of the scale. And you think, okay, that means they're probably turning over the ball less. And that's true. They've gone from pretty mid-pack from memory for a kicks per just turnover or disposal, retention, that type of thing, to the best in the league. Their meters per kick has gone to the shortest in the league from being pretty mid-pack. Their expected retention rate has become the safest in the league.
Sorry, Cody.
They're taking more marks than any team in the uncontested marks. Sorry, you go.
Can we now officially call expected kick retention our favourite stat?
Oh, look, I love it because it can tell you the intent of what a team's trying to do. It doesn't tell you whether they're good or bad at it. It just tells you what they're trying to do. And Fraser has quite clearly told them that you don't need to play so risky all the time. Earlier in the year, Carlton did that a lot. And there was that first game against Sydney where it nearly looked like they were going to hold on there. But it's like a house of cards. Like, eventually it's going to fall over no matter how well you're doing it. If you keep being really risky, like the odds are that it's going to blow up on you. So they're taking a lot of marks now, a lot of uncontested marks, finding a lot of targets, transitioning the ball better. And the other good one for me is they're scoring a lot from centre clearance. And they've always been such a stoppage heavy. Matteo, you wrote a really good piece at the start of the year about them being such a stoppage focused team. Well, that's been ramped up, particularly from centre clearance, not from stoppage clearances, not from around the ground stuff, but particularly from centre clearances. And is there stuff that you've noticed, Matteo?
I think the fact that Fraser has dialed down the risk with Carlton's disposal is a really big one. I actually think one of the biggest, call it tactical mistakes that Voss made is I think he slightly misdiagnosed his side's capacity to win those post-clearance contests. And I think it's probably quite an understandable mistake to have made, because if you look at a kind of centre bounce core of, Cripps, Hewitt, De Koning, I suppose, when he was there, also like quite a good contest player, and then up forward, obviously, Mackay and Curnow, you would immediately sort of think that, okay, we're sort of happy to take lots of territory, take quite a lot of risks with kicking, but particularly because Carlton's defensive transition structures were usually, I think, pretty poor under Voss, it would lead to those, those fade outs that you describe, which often would happen, and that house of cards would start collapsing later in games when Carlton's players began to physically tire a little bit. They became less capable of winning those contests outside of stoppage, and it felt like they didn't have a kind of safety mode. They didn't have a retention mode that they could really kind of effectively switch to. And so it seems to me that Fraser has added that layer, and it's almost a kind of, I hope listeners understand that I'll be exaggerating if I call it a Brisbane-style mode, but this idea of actually, retention by foot, fairly conservative progression up the field with ball in hand that actually sort of functions as a sort of rest defense mechanism. And it sort of helps them set up behind the ball a little bit because they're not sort of launching inside 50 from, the center line, which it felt like they were doing so much under Voss because there was always that temptation to get it long to Kerno and Mackay. So that, I think, is a pretty big eye test difference for me, and it seems to have been borne out statistically as well.
A lot of it's like a vibes thing, though, too, isn't it? Like, it
Yeah.
feels like the players are sort of relishing a second chance. Do you think that's a bit of the case, Jonathan? That it's just sort of, I don't know. Sometimes when there's someone who's about to go, everyone gets a bit tense and gets a bit nervy because their livelihood is in your hands. Do you reckon there's anything in that?
Oh, of course, they were a team that was sort of carrying a boulder on the shoulder for so long, and it's only natural when the coach goes that they're going to be unburdened by that, and they're playing like that accordingly. The question there is, I mean, you start asking, what would Michael Voss be thinking of that his players are suddenly playing like that? He'd be forgiven for thinking, well, where was that 6 weeks ago, guys? Had you checked out by then? And what? So you could see what he was trying to build and what he was trying to change in those early months. And you saw it for an hour here and an hour there, but it just wasn't, as Matteo, you said before, it just wasn't sustainable for 2 hours. And the opposition coaches would go to work on that. And whereas now they look so much more assured when the heat comes in a game. And there's always these little 30-second moments in a game that can sort of tilt one way or the other. And there were a lot of those in the GWS game. That passage of play close to three-quarter time where they just really, really competently, calmly, and really smartly move the ball in a way they never would have 2 months ago. And it's passages like that can tilt a game. And they had about 3 or 4 of those little minutes that were crucial in that game on Saturday.
I think the journey that this Carlton side has been on over the last 3 or 4 years has been one of the things that's kind of converted me from what I used to be, I think, a sort of footy psychology skeptic. That what sort of happened between the shoulders, maybe it didn't matter much, or that it sort of did, but it's hard to model. So it's not something that quote unquote serious analysts really pay that much attention to. But I think there's something to be said for the fact that, after being 1-8 and Voss, resigning, falling on a sword, being asked very nicely to fall on a sword, there was a sense that already, maybe the worst case scenario had been sort of realised already for Carlton season. And so I do wonder, to your point, Jonathan, whether there's something about this idea that it sort of feels like they're playing with house money now. Like there suddenly isn't a side, in a way, it's a side that has failed, and that failure has reset expectations. Almost that toxicity has happened. It's had its crescendo. It's had its climax. It's been washed out of the system now. And I think the fact that actually Fraser is playing the kids, that's a big part of it as well. It sort of creates a different reference point for supporters. It's now, what is Jack Ison doing? What is Taylor Byrne doing? What is Harry Dean doing? We're still going to get Cody Walker. Fabulous. But I think it just kind of creates this psychological stability that seems to have manifested in the way the side is playing, because they look just much more stable in all phases of the game.
And I'm definitely from the psychological school of football analysis. It's why I think we've done this podcast, is we the three of us see the game differently. And I'd love the three of us to do a sort of Myers-Briggs type analysis of how we see the game, because it's it is, if ever a team was an emotional team, that it's this Carlton team. Like, some teams are very by the book and what they are is what they are, but this Carlton team's never been that. They've ridden this sort of roller coaster for the last 4 years, and I don't know if that comes back to the leaders, because those leaders at Carlton seem like so even tempered and so not like that, but maybe they are. Who knows?
I think once you play a lot of sport, and I think most of us have played at least a fair bit of it, you can take numbers away, but if there's bad vibes in the dressing changing rooms after the games or pre-game, if the guys don't like each other or believe in each other or just don't believe in the coach's message, it does reflect on the field. Like the underlying numbers can work, but it's like that extra 10% that you don't put in if you just don't believe in what you're doing. I don't know. I've been a part of really, really talented teams that have gone absolutely nowhere in a variety of sports, mostly because the instruction's been poor.
And definitely those signs were there at Carlton. Even a thing like that Sam Doherty voicemail message, you really have to ask, well, at other clubs would that have happened? Clearly something was amiss there, and they were talking a good game and everything. But, yeah, like you said, I mean, suddenly when you've got a player playing the harmonica in the rooms afterwards, it's reasonable to assume that it's a pretty happy workplace for the time being.
It was the opening of Piano Man, wasn't it?
It was. I think, did he actually play the club song as well, or was it just Billy Joel? He did both?
I think he went across, he did the segue. And I find it ironic that he's played Piano Man on a harmonica. He probably should be arrested for that, but, I'm not the music police.
Well, no, but Piano Man does start with a harmonica bit, doesn't it?
And Joel should be arrested too.
Matt Cottrell is a unique operator. I rate it. Cody, let's turn our attention to the future now. Josh Fraser, of course, I guess in what now looks like a strategic masterstroke. Played down, I guess, his desire to win the job. What was that after his first win, maybe? But now he sort of looks like the hero in the hoodie. Clearly, Carlton, I guess the Warriors, they've been down this road before in living memory with David Teague, right? Where an interim has come in and he's seemingly lifted a psychological burden and kind of moved enough magnets that results have reverted. And, regression to the mean is part of the story as well. Coaches usually get sacked because they, among other things, experience a prolonged run of bad luck. And obviously Carlton ended up appointing Teague permanently, and that, didn't work out. I guess, what sort of a data point do you think do these 5 games constitute, and how much should they sort of shift the priors of the people who make the calls at Carlton?
Personally, I think it's just way, way too early. So there's a few of those numbers that I referred to earlier, and I'll point one out in particular. That's the center clearance score differential. They're not winning any more of them, really. They're winning the same number relative to their opposition. They're just scoring exceedingly efficiently from them. They're scoring at a rate that would be the best in the last decade from center clearances.
And could I just say, sorry again to have interrupted, Cody, shout out here to friend of the show, Ricky Mangidis of the Shinboner, who also pointed out in Carlton's run to the prelim in 2023 that was actually powered by this astonishing and totally, in hindsight, unsustainable run of scoring from stoppages. So it's a funny kind of mirror image of something that happened 3 years ago.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that their retention is still like well above expectation. I don't think they've suddenly gotten a bunch of great ball users in. They're not allowing any tackles inside 50 for their opposition. Like, surely there's a lot of things that they're bouncing so far on the right side of luck that it's the inverse of how Voss was bouncing on the wrong side of luck. So in that situation, I'd kind of want to wait another 6 to 8 weeks. It's quite clear that Fraser's had a good rep. We did a demo episode. No one else is going to hear it of this podcast. And on that, like, we talked about Fraser's reputation. He worked at the Bull Ants before this, and he's had a pretty, storied footy career, former number 1 draft pick. He's got the rep as a good player, players management coach, development coach. He's still pretty light on experience, and I think 5 weeks just isn't enough to change that. And I think that's why he was a bit apprehensive going in. I think he'd be feeling, he probably wouldn't say it out loud, but he'd be feeling more like he can do it. And I think that's where you want to just see what happens when they lose a game. How does the team respond? How does he charge them up for next week? Does he get really emotional? Like, what's the breakdowns like in the rooms? How does he get the players back on track? You kind of can't take too much out of a winning streak, oddly enough, because it's hard for a coach to show their true value when you're winning, because no team's ever won every game, right? It's how you respond. It's the resilience. That's why you pay a coach big money. It's not, oh, yep, steady as she goes. So I think Voss is probably doesn't get enough credit here. And that's the big one. I think Fraser's success right now, he hasn't shifted a ton. He's told them to probably be a little less aggressive, probably told them to consider their actions at stoppage a bit more. But I don't think there's been, huge shifts. And I think for Fraser to truly put his mark on the job, we want to see what happens well post-bye. We want to see what happens after a loss. Sorry, that's a lot of chatting. Jonathan, I guess.
That's what we're here to do. Yeah. Jonathan, over to you.
I agree with that, and I've written more harshly of Voss than most, and to the point where my editor was saying we can't do any Michael Voss stories, Jonathan. That's it; it's game over. But I think that sometimes a coach who has sort of outstayed his welcome, so to speak, still often try to change things in towards the end of their tenure, and we saw that to some extent with Nathan Buckley, I think, at Collingwood, and what McRae inherited. McRae very much brought that emotional connection that maybe had evaporated at the end under Buckley. And also with Simon Goodwin at Melbourne, is that they were doing things differently towards the end, and King has sort of freed them up a bit, and they've gone on from there. And I think there's an element of that with Voss as well in what Fraser's doing at the moment. What it does is it leaves them with a really, really hard decision to make at the moment. And that is, what would it actually have been an easier decision if Carlton were 3-2, say, or even 4-1, and everyone agreed that Fraser was doing a really good job and the team was improving and they were clearly unburdened, and that maybe, he would be an ideal senior assistant to a Longmire or someone like that. But things are a little bit more complicated now, so they've got a really hard decision to make at Carlton.
I suppose it means, and I don't think anyone really at Carlton should be credited for this because it's not really like it happened on purpose. But actually, I think we can probably all agree that 5 games isn't much of a sample size. But by the end of the season, Fraser will have had 14 games. That is a sample size, from which I think you can reason. You can draw some sort of conclusions. I totally agree, Code, with what you're saying, that the test comes when Carlton loses a game.
Yeah.
And maybe when it loses a game in a manner that's reminiscent of the way they were losing games under Voss. When some of the halo starts wearing off, Fraser, I think it was Ken Hinckley might have been on SEN talking about the fact that, and look, I think this should be understood in the context of Hinckley and Voss being friends and, of course, working together at Port Adelaide. So I think it was Ken kind of sticking up for a mate. But I think he sort of suggested that we cool our jets a little bit on Josh Fraser because coaching is, and this is a hard thing for a lot of people to accept, I suppose. Coaching is, among other things, a lot more than just the 3 hours on a Saturday, right? It's a lot more even than results because you can get lucky with results. It's about performances and it's about being a manager and a manager of people and systems from Monday to Friday.
Especially at a big club like Carlton.
Especially at a club the size of Carlton. But, look, 5-0. He couldn't really have started better. Their next 4 fixtures, West Coast at home,
Tick.
Richmond away,
Lock.
Hawthorn at home, and then the old enemy, Collingwood away.
Jeez,
gosh.
Interesting.
So they're 6-8 now. Where will they be? Could they be 9-9 after the next 4 games? And then with the top 10 in reach, Wheeler ratings, speaking of friends of the pod, currently has Carlton as 43.5% likely to make the top 10.
Holy dooly.
Yep.
Yeah, it's crazy. Well, that Collingwood game is going to be one of the biggest Collingwood games, I reckon, in maybe last decade or two. Like, we're going back a fair way.
Oh, I reckon that round 22 game, the year
in 2022.
Yes,
yeah,
that is tattooed in my brain. That game, that was massive. But I agree, it's going to be, and even the Hawthorn game, they've had Hawthorn of. I always thought that Sam Mitchell just outworked Voss tactically a lot in their recent encounters. So it'll be fascinating to see.
It will be, and no doubt we'll chat about it. But for now, we've gone fairly long, I think, on this segment. So hopefully it's, been enjoyable and enlightening. We're going to be right back with more 110%ers.
You're listening to the 110%ers.
We're back on 110%ers, the footy podcast. On Monday and Tuesday this week, club CEOs met with the league's top brass to discuss the shape of the fixture once Tasmania probably enters the league in 2028. AFL reporter Cal Toomey reported that the CEOs were presented with 4 distinct options. I'm going to try and run through these kind of comprehensively but quickly because, I'm just the host. The other 2 are the talent. Option 1 would see the home and away season shortened to 22 games. 18 games and 4 double-ups. Gather round would be removed, which would be funny given they just extended it. Or the AFL would buy back home games to ensure an even 11 home and away game split. Jonathan is shaking his head. Option 2, the home and away season would be increased to 24 games, 18 games and 6 double-ups, 2 neutral rounds, including gather round. Option 3, the home and away season would be decreased to 20 games and a 3-week group stage structure would be added. There'd be 18 games and 2 double-ups, gather round and rivalry round. After those 20 rounds, the top 16 teams would be split into 4 groups of 4, and they'd play each other once before a final 10 is determined. Or option 4, the home and away season would be decreased to 20 games and a 3-week in-season tournament would be added, NBA style. There'd be 18 games and 2 double-ups, and then a 3-week block in season for the tournament. There'd be 4 groups of 5 clubs. And in case you're wondering the identity of the 20th club, it'd apparently be some sort of State League All-Stars concept. So an interesting, again, natural experiment, especially for those people who think that there, isn't enough talent to support, 20 or even 18 AFL clubs. Hopefully that made some sense, listeners. A little bit of, perplexment and bafflement here in the studio. Cody, let's be real. What do we think are the chances of the AFL willingly shortening the season?
Yeah, look, I think it's such an interesting idea to float these 4 concepts. So I think all 3 of us have worked in areas where you sort of have to float several ideas for decision makers, no matter how good or bad. You can't present someone like one option because like that removes the authority of someone paid a lot more than you, and in this case club presidents who are the bosses of the situation largely. There's a bit of interplay in which clubs are controlled by the AFL, but I digress. So I reckon they've had to come up with options to justify that mandate. At the same time, they've done a lot of study trips overseas in recent years. You kind of have to do this stuff every now and again to prove that they're actually study trips and not pure junkets. And it feels like copying. Well, they've copied their homework from the NBA in-season cup. They've copied the homework from the Scottish Premier League. They split into 2 groups of 6 after I think round 36 or something like that.
Yeah.
Their final bit. So it's like proving that these junkets aren't junkets, like they're junkets, right? The junkets are junkets, and they probably learn a bunch of other things and have a bunch of real confidential stuff that they can't justify publicly. But this just feels like thought bubble policy making, which often leads to pretty poor results. And I think that's some of the feedback. Going back to the original question, it was always going to be 22, 24. We wrote in an article last year where, Andrew Dillon came to Canberra last year, sort of cover of night, and was spotted talking to ACT government people. That they're probably not going to stay at 19 forever. We wrote that you had to go to 22 or 24. 22 buying back a game, that's what the NRL does for their Magic round. I don't know if that's palatable. I think 24 is by far the right option there. I kind of want to let Jonathan his opinion, because he's doing a lot of these facial expressions. We're very good. We're doing a lot of face work this week, guys, like a lot of kabuki gear. Sorry that's not a video podcast this week, but Jonathan.
I like what you were saying there, Cody. It was more as Matteo was sort of reading out the 4 options which were laid out like you said, by Cal Toomey in the last couple of days. I always think with things like that, how would I explain this to my elderly parents who both are vaguely interested in football, but are a bit bewildered by these changes that are constantly thrust upon them. And there's few things in football that make less sense than our fixture. It is whoever can sort this out deserves their own statue next to Lee Matthews and Dennis Lilly and so on. It is a mess. And I've always, and I probably differ from about 95% of footy people here, and I'm just willing to say it anyway, but I've always been in the less is more camp when it comes to these things. I think it would take an incredibly brave administration that would say to their broadcasters, no, we're going to pare this back to a 20-round season, and every game is going to have more consequence. The players are going to be physically better prepared, and the competition is actually going to make sense, and it's going to be fairer. So those 4 things. But it's either going to take a very smart person or a very brave person, or both, to pull this off. And I'm not sure there's been a lot of evidence that that's going to happen.
I want to ask a question without notice. It's not on the run sheet, so I'm going to try and think and articulate as I go.
And, run sheet, Mateo. Like, don't. What's a run sheet?
No, you're right.
If it helps you, I don't read it. So
yeah, exactly. Cody goes off the cuff every week, and yeah, he still makes more sense than either of us. Is there a story here, do we think, about? Look, I've written earlier in the season about changes behind the scenes at Fox/KO, how it's owned by beIN, which is a sort of private equity vehicle that's funded from, among other places, by the Saudi Public Investment Fund. I think there is some anxiety, perhaps, at AFL House about what the next broadcasting deal might look like. Downstream of that, of course, it impacts players because, well, that determines the contours of the EBA, player remuneration, and so. Look, I mean, I guess I'm not saying anything groundbreaking by saying, is it actually kind of a slightly cynical ploy by the AFL to add more bells and whistles onto the fixture to sort of try and juke some commercial interest where there might otherwise be concern that the next broadcasting deal might not be as big and juicy as the current one?
I can do some reporting from the border of the Barassi line here. So the only game in town for us, the only game in town is rugby of the league and union varieties. So, a mad Raiders fan, of course, as all AFL journalists should be. Get on board the Raiders.
I've heard they're not doing so well this year.
Not a good year, no. But yeah, Viking Club, great. NRL is trying to go for their next round of bidding. They've had leaks about what the first round of offers have been, and it's been at 550 to 600 million per year, yet varied lengths, and they're trying to create a bidding war between the 9 camp and the Foxtel camp, who's going to potentially on-sell the 10 and 7. This is relevant because it's going to impact the AFL deal when it's up in 2032, but the market might very well change by then. Now, it's worth noting that the AFL is at 650 per year. So the upper end of what the NRL has received reportedly via the AFR is 50 million a year less than what the NRL is getting. So it's going to be a higher total deal, they reckon, but it's going to be lower per year. I think that's an indication of the market cooling slightly. Volume matters, right? At a certain point. So in the Tassie expansion case, there was the thought that adding an extra 9 games a year for Tassie, going to 19 teams, I think it's about 11 games a year, you increase it by about 4 million a game. Carter did some research and he reckons it's actually 1 to 2 million because you don't add at the top end, you add in the middle. And in that instance, if you add sort of $10 to $12 million a year or $10 to $15 million a year, that does add up over some time, and that extra quantity adds up. AFL games are longer than NRL games, so the ratings are lower, but you get more ad time to sell because there's scoring, there's quarter breaks and not half time. So there's a lot of factors here. I think getting rid of unenviable fixtures, and Jonathan, just on that note, I reckon most people in footy are keen for less footy. It's a really weird one where the fans all want to see their team as many times as they can, but the people who work in the media and work at clubs have to watch every game. And that's a lot of football. Like Adam Kingsley told me earlier this year that he'd be in favour of shorter games, COVID-length games. And he's not the only club or coach that's told me similar, like less football might be better.
Well, I mean,
It's just deeply,
well, Patrick Dangerfield, of course, said that he'd quite like shorter games. And it was, I might be getting the timing wrong here, guys, but I think he made those remarks. Well, it was a tweet, I think, from memory, after he'd stepped down as president of the AFL Players Association, but still obviously such an influential and widely respected and vocal, I guess, member of the AFL community. So, yeah, it does seem like a lot of people in the industry, including perhaps even the players, would want maybe a little bit less footy.
Yeah, I've been talking for a fair while, and I guess I'm struggling to make a point here. I think there's a lot of empathy with the fact that a shorter fixture would be good. But Matteo, there is that fear that a shorter fixture or shorter games may lead to less revenue, which means to smaller pieces of the pie for everyone in the game. And that's just what they're going to have to get at. The obvious solution to that is Team 20 as well, because then you can increase the total number of games, but have shorter seasons for each team. But I'm not going to get too much into that. Sorry, I'll throw it back to you guys.
Jonathan, you are now officially on the record, because that's what 110% is, as saying that you'd like less footy. So listeners, take it up with Jonathan. What would be your ideal fixture in a sort of first principles, Rawlsian world where it was done again from scratch?
If we were to totally start again from scratch?
It's a blank slate.
Okay, well, what a world that would be.
Like Geelong play every game at GMHBA?
Yeah, they don't get enough down there, do they? Look, in an ideal world, I would love each team to play each other once and to possibly have one game where you play your main rival again. Yeah. And I think that we can then get creative in terms of what we do during the season, in terms of state of origin games and things like that, or an Indigenous All-Stars game or anything that you can do. But it's not going to happen. They're not going to do that.
Well, because the line always has to go up, doesn't it?
It does. And I remember on his Sliding Doors podcast, Craig Hutchinson saying that it's just talking, and he's really interesting when he talks about these things, talking about the just what a masterstroke that was from Gil McLaughlin to get that deal back in 2022, perhaps. And that if that same deal was cut now, well, what percentage of that would it be? Because it would be nothing compared to what he was able to pull back then. So, yeah, I mean, is it going to be the difference between, say, Bo McCreary making $1 million a year or $800,000 a year? But there's so many other things to factor in, the concept of a universal buy each year.
Yes.
And I've heard Andrew Demetrio talk about constantly trying to get that up when he was in charge and being shouted down by Foxtel and News Limit and Channel 7 executives because he was desperate to have that break and to do something, like I said, to do something creative with that week. So that's not going to happen either, because so much of the confusion now is these rolling buys and that creates almost
get ready for next year.
Well, exactly.
Oh, 2028 or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, but yeah, in an ideal world, I would make the season 2 or 3 rounds shorter, but it's not going to happen.
Cody, we've heard from Jonathan. He would like a sort of X+1 model. What about you?
Yeah, like I don't mind the other way, making games slightly shorter. I'm sort of in that camp a bit. I think X+1 makes it a bit hard from a competition equity point of view, because like if you're Freo and you get a double up against the Eagles,
yes,
that's a pretty soft win. And I think that would skew it a bit more. We've done some research into the past. There's like 5's not a bad number. 3 you can make work. Anything less than 3, it's really hard to make that double up make sense from an equity point of view. And it's a pretty small bickies type thing, but I think it's bigger than home ground advantage, right? Because you can, a 90% win is more than like an extra 2% 9 times a year. So I think something ideally, I wouldn't hate a 22 game season. I don't hate 22 games, no gather round, which is definitely going to happen. They were shopping a second gather round. Remember, they were shopping a second gather round before South Australia said, if you sell a second gather round, we're not going to spend as much for this first one.
Well,
before they locked this deal in.
Well, yeah, and apparently Adelaide turn down the option of playing, 2 gather round games in 5 days or something. I contemplated writing to the club saying, no, you fools.
There's a lot of stuff here that I think they've presented options that are just probably going to be unviable. And
is there
ultimately,
any? Oh, sorry, you go on, Cody.
No, you go, Jonathan.
I mean, is there any scenario where this in-game tournament can work? Because I would actually, of all those options, Matteo, you laid out earlier, and the fourth option is obviously the one Sam McClure went with last year, where we play 20 games or whatever, and we have this in-season tournament. Is there any scenario where that could work? Because I like to think that if we could make that work, I think we solve 2 problems at once here.
I want to answer your question, Jonathan, by first quickly asking Cody a sidebar question to make sure that I'm speaking from a position of, facts. Cody, you're a basketball guy. The NBA in-season tournament, those games, they do count toward a team's home and away record, don't they?
Yes, mostly. Man, I hate saying
Oh,
yes,
wow.
mostly.
Okay. That's not an answer I was expecting.
Every team except for 2 plays 82 games under the in-season tournament. So the round robin games and the knockout games, the teams that don't qualify for the knockouts, they play games against equally matched non-qualifying teams.
Sure.
They all count up until the final. The final is an 83rd game that doesn't count to statistical records. It doesn't count for anything except for the big cash prize.
Okay.
So if they're copying that model, I mean, I imagine they'd try to, the NBA in-season tournament, it's just regular season games that they paint the court different colors, and you get a big cash bonus if you win the NBA Cup.
Yeah.
And I think the final, but yeah. Sorry, you go ahead, Matteo.
Well, I was just going to say, unless I've read it wrong, the option that was presented to the club CEOs that did include the in-season tournament, get the car back on the track toward what Jonathan actually asked, it made it sound like the in-season tournament, the results of that wouldn't count toward the actual home and away records. They wouldn't figure for, finals calculations. It would instead be treated as a parallel thing. And then, I mean, don't you just run into a sort of massive who cares, kind of legitimacy problem? It seems as though I don't follow the NBA anywhere near as closely. I think there's been a sort of fairly concerted effort by the teams, to sort of generate hype and to make it seem like a big thing. I believe the Knicks won this season's in-season tournament as well as obviously winning the finals. But I mean, the image I have in my head when I talk about this in-season tournament is Lenny Hayes and Grant Thomas lifting the Wizard Cup, and neither of them even being bothered to smile, really. And what happens the first time the star does their knee during the in-season tournament?
Exactly. I thought of that Grant Thomas image as well. And unfortunately, Grant's such a sort of joyous figure on Twitter these days that he sort of overrides that. But no, I mean, it's and it's hard to, think of someone like Chris Scott or Ross Lyon taking a tournament like that seriously. And also the idea in the AFL of, well, who cares about the cash? Because if you need money,
you can't really spend it, right?
If you're a club in the AFL, you just go to the AFL for your money. So, yeah, it would be hard. And I think that's, like I was saying, when Sam McClure floated this idea last year, I think in his column that it was going to contribute to premiership points, whereas now the talk is that it won't. So,
Can I have a quick think about how to reconcile those two?
Please.
I think what they're going to do is the round robin games, they're going to have to split into groups, right? They'll count to home and away, but once you get to the knockout, I imagine they'll go to a top 8 after they do groups of 3 or groups of 4. You can't break 19 easily, so I guess they'll have the 5 groups of 4 with the State League All-Stars.
They've spoken about 4 groups of 5, I believe.
Whatever.
Yep.
They'll play them in the first half of the season. The mid-season break will be like Origin plus the top 8 teams from the top 2 teams from each group, I'm guessing, would go into quarterfinal, semi-final, final. And those games wouldn't count. The rest of the league would get a 3-week bye, which is just so unpalatable, right? In the middle of the year to have half your competition just sitting on their hands. I can't see it.
Again, I'm trying to imagine myself explaining this to my elderly parents. I think they'd just walk out on me if I told them that. So
Sorry,
There's
Cody.
also this perception that it's a huge success in the US, but like in the first year, ratings were pretty passive. This year, they were a bit better, but they also were looking to avoid scheduling with other sports. Like the jury's firmly out whether it's worked as a concept over there and if it's actually improved, the broadcast rights deal and early season fandom. Like early season NBA games, because the season's so long, they're a bit of a snooze fest to begin with. But like, it's not a slam dunk that it's worked like as well as some people are saying. So it's a bit weird that this is the idea that they've picked on. Footy's had an idea of this before. Like Jonathan's probably old enough to remember the Escort Cup and no, but you probably remember Night Premiership and the Escort Cup. They used to have SANFL teams playing against VFL teams and Waffle teams, and everyone would send their seconds to play. And
I used to go out to Waverley and watch Swan Districts play against Richmond in front of 11,000 people. It was great.
2,688 people. Richmond versus Swan Districts. Richmond won 214-28 in 1982. That's the game you would have been at. It was Tuesday, the 22nd of June. Isn't that good that I've got the research in front of me?
I want to see the expected scores.
That wasn't set up too.
It wasn't a setup. No,
that wasn't on the run sheet, Cody.
I do my research quick. But yeah, like 2,000 people rocking up for like that might be where we get to. Like if we go to that thing, because I don't know, I just don't see it. Sorry, Matteo.
I was going to try and act as a sort of temporary devil's advocate for the in-season tournament concept. And yeah, you've obviously kind of added actual data about the case in the NBA. And it sort of seems like they were trying to solve for maybe a different problem, which is that no one really cares about what happens in the season before February, basically. Where Jose Mourinho, about 20 years ago, when he was the hottest coach in European football, he spoke, I think, really interestingly about the importance that he assigned to his Chelsea side winning. It wouldn't have been called the Carabao Cup at the time. It would have been called the Carling Cup, I think, the secondary domestic cup tournament in England. And look, Jose Mourinho didn't mind sort of self-serving remarks, so maybe he just wanted to sort of build his mythos, but he spoke about the importance of getting a young team used to winning.
Yep.
And so maybe there's a point there to be made that, okay, Chris Scott won't care about the in-season tournament. Tim Hardwick probably won't care about the in-season tournament, but maybe Andrew McWalter will.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And even when you look back in the dying days of the pre-season competition, there was still, even when Geelong won in 2006, was that in Adelaide? It might have been.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that was important to what they did the next year. That sort of gave them a lot of confidence that even though the subsequent season was a disaster, that they could actually be a really good team. So, yeah, I could see that. And that's a very, I remember Mourinho saying that as well.
Mm. Well,
I was going to say they did bring the in-season tournament trophy to the Knicks victory parade. They didn't do a separate one after they won one mid-year, shockingly. And Jalen Brunson, sort of laughed at the guy who brought the in-season tournament trophy. Because they'd won the big thing. Why are they bringing this thing that no one cares about to it? So that's my thing.
Maybe NBA teams need to learn to do the thing they do again in European soccer, where they talk about the quintuple and the quadruple, which is often includes trophies that no one really cares about. Exactly, it'd be a double. Anyway, look, we have run really long on that segment. It turned into a very interesting discussion, but yes, evidence that once again the AFL puts out a thought bubble, and everyone responds, reasonably and amicably, and everyone assumes that the AFL is operating in good faith. That's the end of that segment. We're going to be right back, shooting from the hip.
You're listening to the 110 Percenters.
Welcome back to 110 Percenters, the footy podcast. You're with Matteo Schlapik-Civillo, Cody Atkinson and Jonathan Horn. It's time for From the Hip, our rapid-fire question segment.
From the Hip.
One host asks, two hosts answer. Cody, the first question is yours.
Hey, Jonathan.
Hey,
should
Cody.
Jack Ginnivan been suspended for his jumper punch?
Too right he should have, Cody. That was a shit-ass act by Jack Ginnivan. I mean, you get more in the AFL if you give the bird, what did Naz get? A $1,500 fine whittled down to $1,000. I'm not even sure it was a jumper punch. It was just a punch. That was a dirty act.
Should we try and work out live on air how long it would take Naz to earn $1,000 in his current contract? I think that would be good podcasting gear.
No, Cody, terrible act. Jack, take a week, and if I was running the comp, 2 weeks for that.
I have a slightly different view on this one, Cody, which is that Jack Ginnivan, he and Tom Mitchell, I like their podcast.
Yeah.
I think it'd be great to do a future collaboration of some kind, Jack, if you're listening. So I think...
Probably ruined that, to be honest. But...
Well, I think it was a great decision to not give him a win. That's what I'll say. Good on you, Jack. No. It did seem strange to me that it didn't get a week. I don't know. Jonathan, next question's yours.
Just on that,
Yeah,
I was going to
please.
say Naz earns about $5,500 per day for the $2 million per year.
Yeah, okay.
Is accurate every single day, so not just in season. So it was a $1,000 fine.
Yep.
I'm guessing that takes him sort of 4 to 5 hours to earn.
Yeah, okay. So about the length of a footy game once you factor in all the warm-up and the cool-down and stuff like that. Not bad.
He can literally earn that money in his sleep is what I'm trying to say.
Nice. Passive income. That's what you want.
We should be fighting the imbeciles who were abusing him on the sidelines. I can't believe.
Should. We definitely should. Yep. Jonathan.
Mateo, who, I'm not sure who sent this through, but good question, whoever it was. Who is an unheralded player in the AFL that we should be talking about more?
Well, Jonathan, thank you for the great question that I wrote. I want to tell you guys about a young Vic Metro player who's playing at a non-Victorian club in a sort of half-forward, playmaking, connecting role.
Can we guess this player?
Well, I mean, you can guess in your head because I will tell you eventually. And he's really kind of knitting together a midfield and forward line that previously had seemed a little bit unconnected, and he's really sort of helping to this team to look a little bit more dangerous. And that player, of course, is Zach Taylor. So I want to shout out Zach Taylor of the team I support, the Adelaide Crows. Really unheralded. No one talks about Zach Taylor, pick number 44 in the 2021 draft, former Quarter Cannons captain. I think he was a midfielder then, but he's not really a midfielder because he's pretty small. But he's a clever little player. He's got a tiny bit of that Sam Mitchell to him, that ability to think very quickly without necessarily being able to move really quickly. Very, very efficient with his disposals. And I'm not sure if it's still true because I haven't looked up the ratings from the weekend's game against Melbourne. But I think he'd been, for the previous 5 games, he'd been in Adelaide's top 5 rated players.
Wow.
For all those games. And that coincides obviously with Adelaide picking up some decent form. So my answer is Zach Taylor.
That's a good shout.
Not sure if either of you. Yeah.
I'll start with the one that I think's been the most underrated across his career. Jake Lever. He's made 1 All-Australian team. It should have been 4 or 5 or more. Injuries hurt him, but I think he's just been under-recognised for so incredibly long with how important he is to that Melbourne backline. Even when May was there, he was doing a lot of that organiser role stuff. And the fact that they're still in the mix this year without May, in the defence, maybe it doesn't look amazing, but it still looks pretty good. A lot of that's down to Jake Lever. So I reckon he's the most unheralded player over a long period of time. I think Lawson Humphreys from Geelong too sort of goes under the radar a bit. I think defenders go under the radar a lot more than midfielders.
Absolutely. Jonathan, any advances on Lawson Humphreys?
No, I like that. One of his...
vehement agreement.
Yeah, they're both great shouts. One of his defensive colleagues, Zach Guthrie, who I'll never
used to be a bit of a whipping boy, didn't he?
Did he ever? Did he ever? And he's one of those players. Why is Chris Scott playing this young man? He was thrown into the cauldron, I remember, in that qualifying final against Richmond, which was not a place for the faint-hearted, that game. And he looked like he was about 9 years old in that game, Zach Guthrie. And I thought, you are never going to make it, young man. And he's definitely made it. And he's a really smart player who just very much a Chris Scott player who just does all the right things and very good structurally. And
listeners, please tell us about your most unheralded, most underrated players. We might do a top 10 style listicle on a future show. Who knows? But please do send through your suggestions. Cody, and Jonathan, just quickly on Lever. I really liked the sort of, it felt like a moment with a lot of pathos when he was chaired off at Adelaide Oval. Of course, kind of an infamous venue for him. And I do sort of find it quite amusing that some of the Crows diehards still boo Jake Lever. But of course, there are Crows diehards who still boo Paddy Dangerfield 10 years later. But game 200 for Jake Lever. Played pretty well on Saturday, actually, and a great career. The final question is mine, and it's a question to everyone. Let's open the floor for reflections on Tony Modra after that awful car accident that he's thankfully recovering from. He's been discharged from ICU, and it seems like he's on the mend. Cody, let's start with you.
Modra is, for me, typifies, and maybe this is the age I am, the beauty of football. He was a highlights player. I think Modra at his best, and that's the year that he kicked 129, the 3 marks of the year, the goal of the year, typifies the beauty of the sport, and he did it in a non-problematic way. A lot of those mercurial key position forwards have unfortunate wrinkles about them at times, and I'm not going to mention names, but I think Modra, at least as a child, felt pretty pure as a footballer and why I like the sport. So hearing what happened to him sort of hit me pretty immediately. I don't know about you guys, and it's never good to hear things like truck accident, emergency care for any human being, any person. But when you've got this connection from afar, it sort of makes it hit home more. I think there's a lot of musicians that I know that have passed that you feel a connection with, even though you've never met them, because you've consumed their art. And Modra's art was as fine as many other footballers, I guess, in the AFL era, despite his journey from Adelaide. I imagine no one in Adelaide boos Tony Modra, unlike Lever or Dangerfield.
Maybe Port supporters, but I think even they probably don't boo Modra. Jonathan?
Yeah, it's exactly what you said, and it'd be interesting to see, like, as someone who grew up in Adelaide, what you make of it. But you just think of that era that he played in. There were just stacks of goals in that era. But the men who were kicking all those goals, most of them anyway, apart from say your Richos and players like that, they were really recluses and they were introverted figures. Whereas Modra was this just phenomenon in this one city. And those games in Adelaide used to be beamed in live on, which was quite rare in those days, to TV in Melbourne. So you get them late on a Sunday afternoon. It was this great time slot to watch footy, and he was just, we'd never really seen anything like him. Maybe, I guess the most comparable is Warwick Kappa, but Modra was a better player than Warwick Kappa, and he, for some reason I can't remember why, but I was redoing the '94 State of Origin game between South Australia and Victoria, which you could argue is one of the best games ever played, and Modra kicks I think 5 or 6 in the first half of that game on a peak Steve Silvani, and there's one kick from Darren Jarman to Modra. If you ever get a chance to look it up, it's almost as good as it gets, like the passage of play where Jarman hits up Modra. Phenomenal player, and I'm just glad seems to be okay.
It is so interesting, isn't it, how sort of certain properties of the podcast just emerge naturally. It does seem as though we might need a dedicated sort of remembering some guys corner on the show, because we enjoy doing it. Your Honor. Yes. We do really, really love doing it. Look, my kind of 2 or 3 cents on Modra is that I think if I was born in 1990, late 1990. I think if I were 2 or 3 years younger, I would have a slightly different sense of Modra, because my most formative early footy memories were the 97 and 98 flags. And of course, tragically, Tony Modra was not a part of those. He is, of course, a part of the mythos and the narrative of that era and that era of South Australian football. So I sort of experienced the best of Modra kind of retrospectively in highlights. I remember him as a player, but by the time I sort of remember watching footy and remember, consuming it as a game, he was a little bit past his best. And I almost actually mostly remember Modra, the Freo player, and kicking, 10 or 11 at the MCG one night, for example. But 2 things today that when I think of Modra, I also think of. One is just how much the game has changed in terms of the athletic and physical profile of players. So I was looking this up while the 2 of you were talking. Tony Modra's listed playing height, apparently 188 centimetres. Jordan Dawson, 192 centimetres. Bailey Fritsch, 188 centimetres. So this is clearly his best work was done really spectacularly in terms of aerial stuff, but there are a lot of midfielders in the competition now who are taller than Tony Modra. And the other thing is that, I mean, it's obviously a cliche to say that it is impossible to overstate Modra's fame in Adelaide of the 90s, but it also it makes me think that he's almost a sort of an emblem of the last days of the monoculture or something like that, where he was. I mean, he was the mayor of Adelaide. He was and I think that's something that Amanda Blair of SAFM fame from back in the day used to say about Tony. He was actually the mayor of Adelaide. He was the most famous guy in town. And so when I think about so much of my nostalgia from the 90s growing up being a kid in Adelaide, it's, a little bit corny, but I think of things like Dazzleland and, Farmers Union and the old Magic Mountain. And yes, Tony Modra standing on guys' shoulders.
What was Dazzleland?
Dazzleland was a little theme park that was contained entirely within the Maya shopping centre on Rundle Mall. And basically its main attraction, Jonathan, was a roller coaster suspended entirely above the atrium, essentially on the 5th story of this Maya shopping centre. There was an urban legend doing the rounds that a kid fell out of the roller coaster or something, and they had to install nets. I don't believe that was actually true.
Sounds like our version of Bobby's World that we had in Melbourne.
Yeah, maybe. But maybe the thing to say and the note to end on is that, Footy Park, when Modra was around, that was the real Dazzleland.
That's exactly. And just one more thing on that is that Modra, and you'd know this, those Adelaide teams were so hard to beat at home, but they'd often come to Melbourne and the grounds would be muddier but Modra always played well in Melbourne. He always came over and he'd go to Victoria Park, which was just feral. And he'd come away with 8 or 9 goals from there. So he had that record, not just at Football Park.
There was also those minutes where there was a thought that he might not make it in the league because I already had Scotty Hodges, who was a superstar goal kicker. There was a thought that Hodges would be the number 1 and Modra would be number 2. And that second year from Modra kind of ended Hodges' career substantively at league level. And that's fascinating that they had just such a monopoly of riches of key forwards there, and sort of by the middle of the decade, both had disappeared. So I think, Modra I think why he was so good on the muddy and the other surfaces is because he sort of floated over them, didn't he? He sort of was unaffected by what was beneath him because he was so busy operating, in the air and above the brain.
He's not in the Hall of Fame, is he? He's probably his record. He'd be a really hard one to know what to do with. I'm not sure he is.
Yeah, he's definitely in the SA and the sort of the Adelaide Football Club Hall of Fame, but I don't think he's in the Australian Football Hall of Fame, to give it its correct title. Maybe that should be rectified. And it's great to hear that he's doing better. And according to Rue, according to Mark Rasciuto, he won't be quite as beautiful as he was before. But again, as Rasciuto said, Modra wasn't exactly lacking in that department. So look, I think we've sort of arrived at the any other business part of the show. I'm going to ask you gentlemen what you have on the cards coming up this week, and what magic is in your fingertips. Jonathan?
I'm just been trying not to be a deadbeat dad this week, so just been doing a lot of dad duties, but also writing about the Richmond rebuild and that game on Sunday, which was a grim watch. That game, that was a horror show.
It wasn't a great advertisement for the code, was it?
No.
I did briefly think, midway through the second quarter, maybe even at half time, I thought we could be on here in terms of a boil-over that would have obviously prompted an avalanche of takes about North Melbourne and their progress and a little bit about Richmond as well. But
they've been patient, Richmond, and I just reckon that was one of those afternoons where you think, my God, have we got more years of these sort of games? Because that was not pretty.
Yeah, it was a bit of a doldrums afternoon. Cody, what's on the horizon?
I've got a weird one. Often I say this, and I didn't know where this was going to go. This piece, but I've sort of landed on. I'm not sure if Ned Reeves and Lloyd Meek are different people for footballing purposes. I mean, the fact that they've almost never been on the ground together at the same time this year. So that's what I'm going to be exploring. Are they just two men with different masks and one's got lifts in their feet? It's worth remarking that for some reason they've gone from a pretty average ruck division to one of the best from hit out to advantage and hit out point of views to getting clearances from taps. And they're the only team doing this extreme split. So I'm sort of looking at the impact of the interchange rule changes going to a 5-man bench. without increasing the rotation numbers. And what the hell Hawthorn's doing there, and can it possibly work?
Love it. Well, I suppose evidence would suggest that it's working really reasonably well so far. This has been another week where it's sort of gotten on top of me just a little bit. I have just published the 4th installment of my mid-season report card series. This one looked at Brisbane, Essendon, West Coast, and Sydney. So thank you very, very much to the contributors for that one. There is, of course, one more coming up because the rolling 5-week bye period. I mean, yeah, maybe I'm actually a lone voice arguing against the single week bye, because then there's just no way I could produce these articles.
That's true.
Well,
It'd be
did we touch
15,000
on that?
words
Like,
long.
what's the next year? Do you want 5-week, 1 week, 3-week buys? Like,
I want
I forgot
whatever's most convenient for me as the 1%ers, right? I mean, look,
Okay.
I think I want to believe that there's some world. Sorry, let me go one step backwards. Thinking in the specific context of the Adelaide-Melbourne game, Adelaide ran completely over the top of Melbourne in the last quarter. Melbourne were clearly fatigued. It was a very physical game anyway. It does strike me as strange. And look, we know the fixture isn't even, that it's skewed in different ways. That has equity effect. Hawthorn have had 2 buys. Melbourne haven't had one yet.
Yeah, they've been stiff. They've been. Yeah, that was a team crying out for the bye.
Yeah. So maybe, and look, perhaps we're being a little bit utopian in our thinking here. Maybe there's a week where the AFL can say no games this weekend, and go to your local state league, go to the parade, go to Swan
State League
Districts,
All-Stars.
go to
The best way to sort out the bye would be getting rid of this abomination of an opening round. I think so many of the confusion around buys and when they occur stem from that.
Jonathan, what have I told you about opening cans of worms?
Yeah, sorry, the fixture.
as
I
we're about
get
to
very
say.
emotional, Mateo.
We all know why opening round I think I know why opening round exists, and that's because New South Wales was originally meant to get gather round, and South Australia came over the top and bid more for it, and this was the sort of compensation type for that, and they gave them opening round, because they're trying to build the game up. And I get it, but you're right, it's not effective.
It was a gazumping, as they say. Premier Malinauskas, good on him, I reckon. Look, that's about all from us this week. You've gotten an extra, 8 or 9 minutes, I think, of 110%ers this week, listeners. My big thanks to Jonathan and Cody, and our collective and hearty thanks to you, listeners. If you like what you're hearing, please review the show on your podcast platform of choice. It makes the show easier to find. I think I might need to slap the explicit tag on this one again.
Apologies, listeners.
No, that's all right. But we'll get that ASMR tag as well. So maybe they'll offset.
And tell a friend to listen if they're not already listening. And if you've got feedback, this is where Mateo says you can email him at hello@1percenters.com.au.
.net.au, but very close, Cody.
Had some great feedback too, like constructive,
Yeah,
positive.
yeah.
We love it.
Absolutely.
If you want us to talk about something, we're more than happy to talk. If you want us to not talk about something, we'll consider it.
And if you want, if you want me to bang on about the 80s and 90s anymore, I've got plenty more in me.
Correct. If we get enough listeners, enough reviews, maybe we can get to monetize this, and maybe we can do a separate spin-off remembering some guys pod every week. So that's, listeners, that's what could be in our future. But I suppose to do the slightly earnest, corny plea, we are really, really loving doing the show. I don't think we can say too much. We can say that too much. But we obviously want you guys to be enjoying it just as much as we are. So please rate, review, share with your friends. We'd really love to be a sort of place where people who love the game can congregate in a virtual sense each week. And even if you're not loving the show, as long as it's constructive, we do want to hear your thoughts. You can write to me, as Cody said, at hello@1percenters.net.au. You can find each of us on Twitter. I suspect in the maybe not too distant future, there might be some 110%ers social media handles popping up in a couple of places. I post each episode to my Substack, and you can share your thoughts in the comments section there. Until next week, I've been Mateo.
I've been Jonathan.
I think I've been Cody.
Yeah, I think you have been. And we are the 110%ers.